everyone.
Hey, everyone.
That's not bright. I want to apologize out front for those of you who are excited to see not me, but my colleague and boss, Catherine Mangu Ward, who's initially supposed to be here. So in Washington, I regret to inform you that many people, including a lot of Reason staffers, ride these really stupid scooters around. There's like a free scooter share thing. You'll see pictures of Robbie Suave. It's terrible. So Catherine was riding her stupid scooter around Washington, literally listening to Justin Amash's podcast on her earphones, and she hit a bump and fell and fractured her knee. So let's pour one out for Catherine. You all know Justin Amash, 5-term congressman. Before that, session in the State House, Michigan State House.
Yep.
I actually feel like since I'm up here and if I'm going to channel Catherine Mangu Ward even for a second, I have to ask you, are you going to run for president in 2024? We did that in D.C., right, in like 2018?
Yeah, well, we'll see. You guys have to make that happen.
There you go. There you go. When are you going to make that decision?
Well, as I said, we'll see. We'll see. It's a little bit early to talk about that kind of stuff. But, you know, I'm always open to running for office. I think I can make a difference, and I have political experience. So if the right opportunity comes up and there's the right infrastructure and the right amount of support, then that's something I would do.
All right. So since y'all are students, or at least you're pretending to be for the purposes of the conference, I thought it would be interesting. Justin, look at him. He's young. He was a young person recently. Ran for your first office when you were 30 years old. And since, I mean, it's kind of an interesting origin story. How do you go from being a nerdy Hayek econ brat in Grand Rapids, getting the perfect grades and doing all the, you know, achieving like the immigrant's son should achieve? How do you go from that to literally finding a job where you have to go out and talk to strangers and make them like you?
Yeah, well, it wasn't easy, and I was even younger than that when I first ran, because when I ran for state office, I was only 27, I think, when I filed. So, yeah, I started young. A lot of you are younger than that, even. And it's difficult, especially if you are not an extrovert. You know, I'm a pretty introverted person. I was not comfortable with public speaking. I was not comfortable getting out there and expressing myself, and it was very stressful at first. But I knew that if I practiced, if I kept going in front of crowds, talking to people, speaking my mind, eventually I'd become more comfortable with it, and it really did happen. There was a long period of time where I thought it would not happen, where I really thought it would just be too difficult to like ever become comfortable with politics.
You'd just be backstage, sweating bullets.
Yeah, I don't know about like sweating bullets or anything, but you know, if you are an introverted person, and I was always, you know, I was a good student. I spoke in class. I did all that stuff. I was valedictorian in high school. But if you are not really an extroverted person and you're put into a business that is all extroverts, basically, these are all type A personalities, it can be intimidating. It can be difficult. You're doing, you know, debates and conversations in front of big crowds, and I think that's something that all of us have to, you know, work on as we get started. And just what I would say to young people here is, even if you're not comfortable doing that, don't let that be a deterrence. Like, just work through it, fight through it. You can overcome it, and that's really the biggest battle, in my opinion. Because once I got through that, the rest of it was a lot easier.
Why did you choose politics? So the family has a business. You can very well work in that business. You went to law school. People go to law school. They become lawyers. Yeah. Why did you choose electoral politics?
So I did work as a lawyer for a short period of time, and I didn't really like it that much. You know, I'm not discouraging any of you from becoming lawyers. I think it is a good career. It's a good background for a lot of things, but I didn't enjoy the work I was doing. It was mostly corporate transactional type of legal work. So I was writing contracts, working on other sorts of agreements, and it was very impersonal. So what I was doing was making a difference, but not the kind of difference that was perceptible beyond a very small circle of people, right? It's like I'm making a difference for the clients I'm working for, and those people certainly appreciate it, and it makes a difference to particular companies that might be using my legal services. But when it came to the broader public, where I thought we needed to make some big changes, I wasn't having an impact there. I was reading Michigan Capital Confidential. This is a newspaper that's produced by the Mackinac Center in Michigan, which is a free market think tank. And I noticed that Republicans and Democrats were actually working together to vote the wrong way consistently. So I had heard that actually they were, always fighting each other, disagreeing with each other on everything. And when I actually read this newspaper, which included votes from the state legislature, it would list the roll call votes. I was like, wait a minute, these things are passing 110-0. These terrible bills that they're writing about in the newspaper are passing 110-0, just handing corporate welfare to giant companies, all sorts of other anti-free trade, anti-free market sorts of legislation passing without any opposition. And I said, I have to get involved here, and I just have to overcome whatever social difficulties I'll face by not being an extrovert. I've got to overcome that because I have to go out and make a difference here.
So let's talk about the congressional dysfunction that we started this. Most people say, at moments of exasperation, Congress doesn't work. Congress is broken, right? And that's usually either a generalized response to they're bickering again and they can't pass the thing, or you don't like the thing that they passed, or whatnot. But you've spent, and I've watched you do this in Grand Rapids, 2 constituents in a diner who were bored. No, I'm just kidding, they're happy. But you've talked about how the process is actually, of the mechanics of the dysfunction is important to understand. Can you walk us through and how maybe that devolved during your 10 years?
Yeah, so when I served in the state legislature, one of the things that inspired me to run for Congress was that I had been quite effective at getting the Democrats to actually adopt a number of my amendments. In fact, I was more successful than any Republican. I was a Republican at the time, more successful than any Republican at getting the Democratic leaders who controlled the state house at the time to adopt my amendments. And people found this counterintuitive because I was simultaneously considered the most libertarian and by some measures the most conservative member of the state house. So they thought, well, how is this happening? And it was because I was actually having conversations with the Democrats. I would just go up to them on the House floor and say, hey, here's the problem with your legislation. I'd walk them through it. They would often pull legislation from the House floor or let me offer an amendment, which a lot of times they would just adopt unanimously or with their support. So it was just a matter of being proactive and reaching out, and I found that other members of the state legislature weren't really doing it to the same extent. So I thought, okay, I'm going to take this bipartisan, nonpartisan libertarianism that I have, I'm going to bring it to Congress. And I got elected to Congress. When I got to Congress, I found that it didn't work the same way. You don't have the same kinds of relationships with people on the other side of the aisle. Sure, they're friends, they can hang out even, but they aren't going to work together on things unless it's something that is either, not that important, some insignificant measure, or maybe sometimes a few of the more eccentric members will get together on either side and they'll introduce something that they know isn't going anywhere. But in terms of getting actual legislation through Congress, it's very rare that you see people from both sides of the aisle working together in a way that actually benefits the American people rather than benefiting the members of Congress. So it was an eye-opening experience, but even as closed as it was in the early days when I got to Congress, and this is not a long time ago, by the way, we're talking about 2011, so I'm not talking about the 1970s or something. So even at that time, say 2011, 2012, 2013, as closed as it was more open by far than what I experienced in my later years in Congress, say 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. By that point, the House had been completely shut down. It became a completely top-down operation. In the early days, I could go to the House floor, offer an amendment, and in many cases get a vote on that amendment. Or I could go and talk to people on the other side of the aisle and get us to work together on something. I worked with Democrats like John Lewis on civil liberties legislation. There were a number of times when I was able to push things with support, even from the other side of the aisle, in the earlier days. And then in the later days, starting toward the end of 2016 and on, Paul Ryan decided that he was going to completely shut down the House. Anything that was going to come to the House floor was going to go through him. And Nancy Pelosi, when she became Speaker, adopted the same attitude. So that's where we are today. And in fact, there hasn't been an amendment freely offered on the House floor, in other words, where it doesn't go through some kind of screening by the leadership, by the Speaker of the House. There hasn't been an amendment freely offered on the House floor since May 2016. So we've now gone over 6 years without an amendment on the House floor. And in the 200+ years of Congress's history, that had never happened.
Wow. So who, sounds weird, but who makes the laws?
So, if something's going to go through Congress at this point, there are only a few people who really decide everything. It's the Speaker of the House, it'll be the Senate Majority Leader, and the President of the United States. And then occasionally, especially on the most nefarious pieces of legislation, they'll even get the minority party involved in it, and their leaders will be involved. But if you think that you are electing members of Congress to go present their own ideas and offer their amendments, and it's like some kind of laboratory of democracy where we're all working together trying to find the best outcome, that is not happening at all. That's why I'm very critical of the Democrats on their claims about being pro-democracy. I hear the Democrats every day, we have to protect our democracy, our democracy, our democracy on everything. And while the Republicans obviously have been terrible when it comes to democracy in many ways, the Democrats are also terrible on the issue of democracy. Because you can't be good on democracy and then run a congressional system where only the Speaker of the House essentially decides what is going to be voted on. And then they are just sitting in back rooms, drawing up this legislation, bringing it to the House floor, and twisting arms. There's no actual back and forth. There's no amendment process, really. It's take it or leave it on everything. And that is not democracy. Congress should be a place where we discover outcomes, not where outcomes are dictated to us. And now what happens really is you're electing someone to Congress, they're going there, they're being told what to do, how to vote. And I know in some other countries this has been commonplace for a long time. But at least here in the United States, the tradition has been that when we elect our representatives, it's not like a parliamentary system or many other systems around the world. In the United States, when we elect our representatives or our senators, we expect them to represent us. We expect them to go and do what we as constituents think is right within the bounds of the Constitution. And right now, they have no ability to do that.
You were a founding member and a key member of the House Freedom Caucus. This is in the way of...
Yes, one of my greatest achievements, by the way.
It's in the wave of the Tea Party wave, which you were part of. I don't know if you self-identified.
I hear they're working on my statue right now.
By the end of your, they were like, instead of like criticizing any government spending because they were just signing off on it, they were singling you out for criticism, the co-founder of the caucus. Can you, besides how fun that is, but can you reflect a little bit on maybe what that tells us about the nature and structure and incentive of politics. Maybe you were a bit naive when you walked in and thought that the business of the legislature was legislating, as opposed to getting in front of a camera and doing the latest defense about Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, I think things have changed a lot. So I don't think I was naive so much as the system has changed dramatically in 10 years, and it's largely gone unnoticed. We act like very little has changed between, say, 2010 and 2020, or 2022, where we are now, but a lot changed. A whole lot changed. The internet changed everything. And what ended up happening is legislators increasingly became actors, like performers. And they go on TV or they go on social media, and they're there to entertain you. It's an audience capture problem. No one's more for free speech. I'm for people tweeting whatever they want. I'm even for bringing Donald Trump back to Twitter, as an example. That's how open I am about this thing. Bring him back. I don't believe you should be booting people off of Twitter willy-nilly. I think the threshold should be very high. Now, yes, they're a private company. They can do what they want, so I'll be clear about that too. But I think that the threshold should be high, because I really do believe in free speech as a concept. But that freedom has also had some consequences in that people now play to the crowd. You see people in politics today who can't legislate. They don't have any legislative powers because that's been taken away by the Speaker of the House. And maybe if Congress functioned properly, you'd get less of the performance art, you'd get less of an impact from social media influencing how they're behaving if they could actually go legislate. But since they can't, what are they left with? They're just left with performative politics. That's all they have. And I've seen people who, in a few years, completely change their ideology simply because a crowd got behind them on Twitter, and when they tweet things that amuse that crowd, they'd get a lot of likes and retweets, and when they tweet things that don't amuse that crowd, they get pushback, and as a result, they slowly transform into whatever the crowd wants. And I think that's happened. It sort of coincided with Trump coming to office. I mean, the technology that started being used in this way happened to coincide with the time when we had a very nationalist, populist president in office. So I think all those things working together have brought us to a pretty bad place. And it's also brought us a lot of great things. I mean, the internet is great. We can learn a lot of things about people. And it's opened our eyes to a lot of things. But at the same time, it has created this performative aspect of politics that has undermined a lot of what we as libertarians would hope would go on, which is principled legislative work.
But maybe, and this is a darker turn perhaps, you say audience capture, crowd capture, this kind of, maybe they're responding to the market, Justin.
They are,
I thought
yes.
you liked the market.
Yeah,
They're giving the people what they want. Isn't this kind of inevitable because of that?
Yeah, but those of us who love the free market, as I do, it doesn't mean we love everything the free market produces. We can have disagreements with what the free market produces. The free market produces all sorts of things that each one of us disagrees with. I mean, you can think of them right now. You can probably think of hundreds of things that are produced by the free market that you don't like.
It's pumpkin spice lattes all the way down. Yeah.
It's a perfect. Think about when you go to a restaurant. Think of how many things you don't like at the restaurant. So you can come up with lots of things produced by the free market that other people like that you don't like, or that create other problems. So we can be believers in free markets. We can say, like I am, I'm for a very open internet. I believe Twitter should be banning fewer people. It should be a freer place than it is currently. And at the same time say, hey, it's had these consequences as well. And how we resolve those consequences, that's a challenge. As I said, one of the ways in which you might address this is open up Congress. Give these legislators the ability to actually vote on things, and that might actually push back against some of the performative politics. The reason they can go into such performance mode is is precisely because they're not voting on things. They're not actually on the record on anything. So they can say whatever they want, and lots of people believe them. The number of votes members of Congress are taking on the record now is way lower than when I first got to Congress. When I got to Congress, we had, just in my first, I don't know, month or two, I think, we had to take hundreds of votes on a spending bill. And we were put on the record on like everything under the sun. Any issue you can think of, we were basically put on the record. Today, what they do is they have an omnibus at the end of the year, and it's just, let's just put 6,000 pages in one bill, and then you just vote yes or no on the whole thing. You don't actually differentiate anyone. So everyone can say, I voted yes because it was just the one bill and I had to, or I voted no because it had one thing I don't like. But there might be hundreds of items, subjects within that bill, and we're not able to determine which legislator was against which item and why. So you've created a world now, because Congress is so closed, where the performative politics really are all that's left. And people buy into it because they don't know that if the person was put on the record, they might actually vote in a way that is surprising or disappointing or even satisfying. We just don't have any of that anymore.
So you fled all that for the Libertarian Party. You heard your former colleague, Joe Walsh.
Yes, a highly functional organization. That's right.
Glad you said it. You heard Joe Walsh say that the Libertarian Party has undergone a takeover of nationalists and nationalist conservatives. There's certainly some performative politics going on in the Twitter feeds at LP National and LPNH. And I know you've criticized them publicly. What do you say to people in the crowd who are anxious about that turn in leadership?
Well, first I'd push back a little bit. I don't think that they are by and large nationalists. You know, I've had interactions with lots of them. I think that actually a lot of them are just energetic young people, like the people in this room, who want to make a difference, and they join the party to make a difference. I think the problem is not as much the philosophy that they hold. I mean, we may have disagreements on some points of philosophy. I tend to be more in the classical liberal world. Some of them are more Hoppian or Rothbardian or what have you. But within the party, there's a mix of people. But I think that the issue is that the strategy is different, that there is at least some segment of the party now, some sizable segment, that thinks that we have to gain relevance by being edgier and sometimes saying things that might be offensive to people because that will attract attention. And it's sort of a strategy of, let's get 100% of the 5% of the population who want that kind of edginess. And it's edgelording in many cases, depending on which state affiliate is tweeting. So I think that there is still potential there, but they have to be pulled back from going in that direction of thinking that the way forward, the path forward for libertarianism, is to just get ourselves attention in the news by saying things that are easily misunderstood by the public at large. They might be saying something that actually, in a nuanced sense, is correct, but they're presenting it in a way that will intentionally offend people. I mean, they know that it will, and it will attract attention. And I think that's a problem. I don't think that's helpful to libertarianism, because then we just get lumped in with sort of the far right. We get lumped in with nationalists, natcons, populists, and the average person out there who's trying to determine what is libertarianism and is this something I want to be a part of, they never really get to our ideas because they're just so put off by what's being presented. It might be just some kind of meme or some kind of image that offends people, and so they never get to the heart of what we're even arguing. And I think that's a real problem. So it's a strategic problem.
We have people here from all around the world. It's a little bit of a dicey time. Dr. Wolf was saying here on the stage earlier that something like 2 billion people live in places that have at least 10% annualized inflation. Inflation is never a good recipe for those of us who don't like populism too much. There's certainly a war, and even slightly heightened possibility of a nuclear war is not something that feels very good, especially those of you who are younger and didn't live through the Cold War. What is your sense of queasiness about where we're going as we head into winter that might be very difficult in Europe and an inflationary economy, and how that might affect the issues that you and we care dearly about?
So just as human beings, where we're going, I think that we are at a time of high risk. Now, I still would tell you that we live in the best times in human history. And that's something that I think also a lot of libertarians don't message correctly. That they often message that times were better before, we were freer before, things were so much better in some distant past. And that's just not true. That's just not true. We have more freedom overall today than at any time in human history. And that's true in the United States and around the world. People who tell you otherwise haven't been studying history and haven't looked back. Even things like freedom of speech have come such a long way in the past, say, 50, 60 years in the United States here. So, yeah, we are living in good time. We're more prosperous than ever. That doesn't mean that we don't have high risks ahead. And obviously, the risk of a nuclear war, there's nothing worse than that. So we do have to be careful. We have to be mindful. We have to continue to work hard to persuade people. We can't create a world where we overcome those who disagree with us by just defeating them. It's not about fighting them and defeating them. You have to persuade them. This is something that Ludwig von Mises talks about a lot, that you can't just defeat these ideas through force. You have to persuade people to join you. The reason he thinks liberalism, classical liberalism, ultimately prevails is because it makes sense. But the only way it prevails is by persuading other people. It can't prevail by force. And I think increasingly you have people in the libertarian world who think we're going to defeat our enemies, own the libs, or whatever, and that's going to make this a better place. So we've got to get back to that place of persuasion, and I do worry that with all the turmoil going on in the world, there will be more populism and nationalism, and we'll have to fight back against that. And we do have to understand those who are pushing back against us. Like I do think, I think Aaron Ross Powell was saying this earlier. We do have to learn about the ideas of those who are disagreeing with us. We have to be able to confront those ideas intellectually. It can't just be, no, you're wrong or you're bad. We have to understand why they're wrong. And I think that's something that we in this room can do, and we have a lot of assets because we have writers like F.A. Hayek. We have writers like Ludwig von Mises who have actually addressed these issues. Everyone should go and read Hayek's essay, Why I Am Not a Conservative, because it is very apt for our times. If you read it now compared to when I first read it, say in the mid-2000s, like, I don't know, 2005, 2006, sometime around then, it didn't mean as much to me. Today it means a lot. So go read Why I Am Not a Conservative by Hayek. And they have already gone through this. A lot of libertarian, classical liberal thinkers have already gone through these challenges. They've written about them. And you don't have to agree with every single thing they say. But I think you can take a lot from them and adapt it to today's situation.
Final thing before we go here, your parents are both immigrants, father's a refugee. came to America and made a great success. A great success. We've had 5 years now of declining immigration, a choked off refugee system. The pandemic effectively closed the border, at least to legal immigration, for 2 years. What, just kind of on a human level, do you think that we are missing when we have a much more closed door and the politics around that closed door than we had even 5 years ago?
Well, I think we lose out on a lot of the spontaneity of life. I think it's great to have people who come here and add something new, something different. If you are welcoming to people when they come here, they will be interested in your way of life. You know, they're not going to come in and say, hey, it's our way or the highway. If you're welcoming to them, they'll say, hey, this place is really a great place. I want to learn more about it. I want to be a part of it. When my dad came here as a refugee and my mom came here as an immigrant, what they taught me as a kid was how welcoming this place was, how wonderful this place was, where it doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter what your religion is, or especially they taught me it didn't matter whether you were connected to those in power. That was a big issue. My parents come from the Middle East. A big issue where they came from. If you knew the regime, if you knew the government officials, you were favored. And if you didn't, you were out of luck. You were staying in whatever station you were in. You weren't going anywhere. And in America, it wasn't like that. That's what they taught me. So when I was a kid, I really took that to heart. I'm here today because of those lessons my parents taught me about their upbringing and what it meant to be in America. So I think this is what's important. We can be a beacon to people around the world. We have to be welcoming to people. When they come here, they can be our greatest advocates. You might welcome refugees here as my dad was welcomed here. And then it turns out that person's child could be a libertarian congressman. So, you know, I think we should be an open and welcoming place, and increasingly what I see from people is, well, we'll welcome only certain types of people in. If they have enough money, if they're from the right countries, and then we're really limiting our ability to expand and grow as a country. And my parents certainly would never have gotten here if those kinds of restrictions were in place. My dad was poor for a Palestinian, so even the Palestinians made fun of him. So that's pretty poor.
Ladies and gentlemen, your 2024 president, Justin Amash.
Thanks, everyone.